She came searching for answers, but her heart carried something heavier than questions: doubt. The kind of doubt that forms in silence, away from public eyes, whispered in moments of grief. "Where is Allah in pain?" she had once asked, her voice cracking under the weight of what she had seen on television screens. Wars, injustice, broken homes, lifeless children, wrapped in white cloth. She wasn't angry, she was confused. If God is merciful, why do the innocent suffer? If faith brings peace, why does the faithful bleed? These questions burned inside her for years until she found herself walking the streets of Palestine, an outsider trying to understand a people who had become symbols of suffering. But what she discovered would challenge everything she thought she knew. The land was scarred, no doubt. Crumbled buildings, roads lined with grief, and stories soaked in loss greeted her everywhere. She expected to see despair in their eyes, resentment in their hearts. But what she saw instead was something she couldn't explain. Smiles, laughter, gratitude. In a refugee camp, a little boy offered her the last piece of bread he had. A mother who had lost her son poured tea for her and said, "Alhamdulillah." An old man recited verses from the Quran as if they were medicine for his soul. And as she stood among them, her question, "Where is Allah in pain?" began to unravel itself. She started noticing the patterns. Every hardship met with patience. Every loss responded to with prayer. Every tragedy softened by remembrance. These people weren't numb, they felt deeply, but their strength wasn't their own. It was drawn from something greater. They believed that Allah wasn't absent in pain, He was closest in it. Their tears weren't cries of doubt, but calls of submission. They didn't ask, "Why me?" They whispered, "Ya Allah, help me through it." That level of faith wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, powerful, and present in the way they lived every day. What stunned her most was their peace. Not the kind sold in wellness books or promised in therapy ads. This was a different kind of peace. A divine peace that came from knowing their suffering was not wasted, that every tear was seen, that every broken piece would be restored, if not in this world, then in the next. For them, pain was not a punishment, it was a passage, a test, a chance to hold tighter, and that understanding filled her with something she hadn't felt in a long time: humility. She came with a question that so many carry but are too afraid to ask, and the answer didn't come from a scholar or a book. It came from the hearts of people who had every reason to lose faith, but chose instead to deepen it. She realized that Allah doesn't promise a life without pain, but He promises never to leave us in it. That the ones closest to Him are often those who suffer with grace, who cry but continue to pray, who lose everything and still say, "Allah is enough for me." Her heart softened, not because her pain disappeared, but because she finally saw how others had transformed their pain into power. Through their eyes, she no longer saw suffering as abandonment. She saw it as a call, a divine invitation to draw closer. And maybe, for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of her pain anymore. Because now she knew where Allah was in it, right there, holding those who never let go of Him. She walked through the narrow streets of Gaza, not knowing what to expect. Her heart was heavy with the same question she had carried for years. Where is Allah in pain? The world had shown her images of destruction, faces of grief, and children buried beneath rubble. She had seen people crying out to the sky, yet receiving no answers. She thought faith must break in places like this. Surely, belief would falter when life became so cruel. But as she moved deeper into the heart of Palestine, she began to see something that unsettled her expectations. Faith not broken but strengthened. Not empty cries, but confident prayers. Not despair, but remarkable patience. It started with a boy she met in a shattered courtyard. His home had been reduced to ruins, yet he greeted her with a smile and words of peace. Allah will give us better, he said. She looked at him, stunned. How could someone who had lost everything still believe in something greater? His eyes weren't hollow, they were full of hope. And in that moment she realized that faith, for them, wasn't about receiving comfort. It was about holding on, even when nothing made sense. There's a rope tied to heaven, not to this world. As she moved through hospitals, schools turned into shelters, and neighborhoods forever altered, she noticed that nearly every person she spoke to spoke of God. Not with blame, but with trust. This is from Allah, they would say. We are patient, and Allah is with the patient. It wasn't a performance, it was real. She could feel it in the way they carried themselves, in the way they faced hardship with dignity, not rage. It was as if they knew a secret the world didn't. That pain does not mean abandonment. That hardship does not erase mercy. Her heart started to shift. The question she had once shouted in frustration began to fade. Because here, among those who had every reason to lose hope, she saw the living answer. Allah was in the hearts of those who still believed. He was present in the sujood made on cracked floors, in the whispered du'as under the stars, in the patience, the gratitude, the strength. She didn't find the answer in words, she found it in their lives, and it changed everything. She sat beside a Palestinian woman who had just buried her husband and 2 sons. The air was still, heavy with grief, yet the woman's eyes held something that shook her deeply: peace. Not numbness, not resignation, but a quiet strength. She spoke gently, her voice steady. Allah tests those he loves. The words struck like lightning. How could someone who had endured such loss still believe in divine love? For years she had wrestled with the idea of pain and God. How could both exist at the same time? And now, sitting next to someone who had suffered more than she could imagine, she saw the answer being lived, not explained. The woman didn't quote lengthy verses or recite complex theology. She simply told her story. How every day she prays Fajr before the sun rises, asking Allah to give her strength. How she says, Alhamdulillah, not because life is easy, but because her heart refuses to become bitter. She believes that every hardship is a message, every delay a wisdom, every loss a doorway to something greater in the hereafter. And it wasn't just beautiful, it was transformative. For the first time, she realized that belief isn't just tested in good times, it's proven in the worst. What moved her even more was how this woman, broken yet whole, carried the grief with grace. There was no complaint, no bitterness, only trust. A trust that was not blind, but built from experience. This woman had watched her world collapse, yet her soul stood tall. And as she listened, she began to see that true faith doesn't ask for explanations. It surrenders to divine wisdom. Pain didn't weaken her, it purified her, and that realization hit harder than any book or lecture ever could. As they sat together in that quiet moment, she felt her own heart softening. The question, where is Allah in pain, was no longer haunting her. Because here, in the presence of someone who had lost almost everything but her faith, the answer was clear. Allah is with those who remember Him, trust Him, and never stop loving Him, even when the world gives them every reason to let go. She didn't expect to cry. She had come with the intention of learning, of observing, maybe even documenting a few stories. But she didn't know that her own soul would become part of the story. It happened one early morning just before dawn. The city was quiet. wrapped in stillness. But inside a modest home, a family was beginning their day with the call to Fajr. She sat silently in the corner, watching. There was no rush, no panic, only peace. A father gently woke his children. A mother whispered a quiet prayer as she laid the prayer mats. And as the family stood in prayer, she felt something stir in her that she couldn't describe. She had never experienced faith like this. In her world, mornings were rushed, distracted, filled with alarms and notifications. But here, in the midst of hardship and uncertainty, this family had chosen to begin their day with worship, with gratitude. They bowed their heads not to the world, but to the one who created it. And in that moment, she saw something she never expected to find in a place so often described with words like conflict or crisis. Tranquility. It wasn't the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. The youngest child, barely 7, recited a verse from the Quran after prayer. She didn't understand the words, but the sound of it pierced through her heart. It felt like truth. It felt like home, even though it wasn't hers. She watched how the parents hugged their children afterward, kissed their foreheads, and reminded them gently to trust Allah throughout the day. There was a rhythm here, a divine calmness that no news outlet ever showed. And in that moment, she understood. This is what faith looks like in action. Not just in prayer, but in the love between family members, in the patience of a mother, in the strength of a father who continues to hope, despite the burdens he carries. She left that home changed, not because someone had convinced her, but because she had witnessed something undeniable. She came looking for answers and arguments, but she found them in quiet faith, in lived Islam. She had always associated strength with noise, with protest, with shouting, with fighting back. But in Palestine, she found a new kind of strength. It was quiet, almost invisible to the outside world. It didn't scream or demand to be seen. It simply existed in silence, steady and unshaken. It was in the way a mother continued to cook for her children while her home lay in ruins. In the way a father still taught his son how to pray, even though they prayed on bare floors. In the way children still laughed, played, and held hands, even though their playgrounds had been reduced to rubble. This wasn't the strength of resistance. It was the strength of surrender to something greater than themselves. He had grown up in a world where suffering was something to be avoided at all costs. But here, in the heart of pain, she witnessed something extraordinary. People who had made peace with their suffering, not because they enjoyed it, but because they believed it had meaning. Their strength came not from control, but from complete trust in Allah. They didn't pretend everything was fine. They didn't numb their emotion, but they believed with their whole hearts that Allah sees, Allah hears, and Allah never abandons the ones who call on Him. That belief was their foundation, and it made them unbreakable. The woman began to notice that this kind of strength wasn't just a survival mechanism. It was a choice, a spiritual choice to keep walking when everything else said stop, to keep believing when the world tried to strip away every reason to have faith. She met people who had lost their families, their homes, their freedom, but never their ability to smile or say Alhamdulillah. That kind of strength didn't come from themselves. It came from the one they trusted. She began to reflect on her own life, the way she handled pain, the way she feared loss. She realized she had been running from suffering, while these people faced it with a grace she couldn't comprehend. And in that moment, something shifted. She no longer saw faith as weakness. She saw it as the deepest, quietest form of strength, the kind that can carry you through a storm and still let you smile while you're in it. She expected anger. After all, How could a people so wronged, so wounded, so relentlessly oppressed still speak of peace and God? She thought she'd find bitterness in their eyes, questions burning on their tongues. But what she found left her stunned. There was no rage, only resolve. No hatred, only hope. She met fathers who had buried children and mothers who had nothing left but faith, and yet they spoke gently. They prayed calmly. They smiled sincerely. Again and again, she heard phrases like, Allah knows, and Inshallah. These weren't just words. They were anchors. In the rubble, she didn't find a faith that was lost. She found one that was unshakable. The most shocking part wasn't just that they believed, but how they believed. She realized that while the world tried to destroy their spirit, Islam had already built it so deeply within them that no force could break it. Their relationship with Allah wasn't dependent on ease. It didn't disappear when things got hard. In fact, it grew stronger. Where she came from, people often lost faith during trials, but here she saw the opposite. Tragedy didn't crush their connection, it deepened it. That was something the world couldn't understand, and it's why their strength often went unnoticed. One evening, she sat with a young girl who had lost everything in a recent bombing, her home, her school, her friends. But the girl smiled shyly and spoke about wanting to memorize the Quran. "It makes my heart feel strong," she said. That sentence shattered everything the woman thought she knew about religion, about strength, about life. She came expecting to document pain, but instead, she found the source of their power, faith that surrenders without giving up. That night, as she reflected on all she had seen, she understood something crucial. The reason these people weren't destroyed by pain was because they didn't face it alone. They carried it with Allah. Their hearts weren't hardened, they were held. And for the first time in her life, she wondered what kind of peace she was missing all along. Not a peace found in comfort, but in trust. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of belief. And that realization stayed with her long after she left. She had traveled across the world with a question in her heart, hoping to find logic, answers, maybe even closure. What she didn't expect was a transformation. She came wondering, where is Allah in pain, but left knowing that He was exactly where He said He would be. With the patient, with the brokenhearted, with the oppressed who still remember Him with love. The answer wasn't something anyone had to explain. She felt it, she saw it, and she lived it through the strength, the smiles, the sujood, and the unwavering trust of the people of Palestine. There were no miracles in the sky, no sudden end to the suffering, but there was something far more powerful, faith that refused to die. And that shook her soul more than anything else ever could. She realized that these weren't people who believed because life was easy. They believed because they had witnessed too much not to. They had felt the nearness of Allah in the darkest nights, and that nearness gave them light, a light she never found in her world of comfort and distraction. Before this journey, she thought faith was about having your prayers answered, but now she understood it's about praying even when they're not. It's about standing broken and saying Alhamdulillah anyway. That's what Palestine taught her. That's what the people showed her. And that's what Islam ultimately gave her. A peace that isn't dependent on the world changing, but on the heart surrendering. She returned home not with a new religion, but with a new lens. A heart softened, a mind opened, and a soul forever touched by the kind of strength that only comes when you truly trust the one who wrote your story. Because when she asked, "Where is Allah in pain?" Palestine answered, not with words, but with lives that prove He's always been there. Thank you for staying with us through this deeply emotional journey. Sometimes the most powerful answers don't come through long explanations. They come through quiet moments, sincere hearts, and unwavering faith. What this woman saw in Palestine wasn't just resilience, it was a reflection of true belief. In the middle of destruction, she found people who still smiled. In the face of pain, she found souls that still bowed in prayer. And in a place where the world expected to find despair, she discovered peace. Real, honest, and unshakable peace. This story is more than just about one woman's journey. It's about what faith truly looks like when it's tested. It's about how Islam provides light in darkness, strength in weakness, and peace in the very heart of pain. It reminds us that while the world may fail us, Allah never does. He is near, especially when the world feels far. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that true strength is in surrendering to the one who never lets go. And if you've ever questioned where Allah is in your pain, maybe now you know. He's been closer than you think. Thank you for watching. May peace and light fill your heart, and may you always remember, when the world is heavy, Allah is enough. See you in the next video, inshallah.